Hello there, honeybees. Today I'm going to tackle something massive that I feel has been bubbling under the surface for me for ages, that I have wanted to address, and I've been collecting my thoughts on this topic for quite a long time. It's not the first time I've discussed it on the channel. I've definitely done, I believe in the past, a tea and tarot episode that was dedicated to finding closure. But what I've been finding is that synchronistically, you gorgeous mistress you, synchronistically I've been working with clients that are working through closure stuff. I've been having conversations with people that are talking about getting over it, moving on, gaining closure, how that happens, what's the timeline for it, etc. Feeling shame about not yet having closure regarding some kind of an issue, and these conversations have just kept coming around during the course of 2017. I found it really interesting, and with synchronicity I'm aware that there is obviously this tipping point where it's actually more like it's no longer a synchronistic energetic match anymore. It's like you keep seeing the pattern, so you keep instigating the conversation, or you keep seeing it as being about closure when actually it's not necessarily. But I can assure you that's not happening in my case. This topic keeps hitting me right between the fucking eyeballs, and I'm going to lasso it today and do some talking about it because it's definitely something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm hoping that this video will help a lot of people. Now, before I begin, I want to state that this video is not just about the kind of closure that we look for after the breakdown of a romantic connection. I know that usually when we speak on closure, the normal kind of like the dynamic that comes up, I think, first in people's minds is that of a romantic relationship that has gone awry, that is no longer happening, and it's really about just moving on from that. This video is much broader. It's going to talk about closure in a generalised way so that you can apply it to any situation that you might need to apply it to. So for example, it can be to do with suffering some kind of trauma. It can be about the loss of a job, or the loss of a dream, you know, or the loss of your physical health and well-being. It can be just as much about finding closure and moving on after bereavement, losing a family member, losing a friend, losing a beloved pet, that kind of thing. So really you get to apply the guidance in this video to any areas in your personal life where you feel like you have not reached closure, or like closure is a little bit of a mirage. Maybe you keep feeling like you're getting there and you realise when you arrive there that it's not actually closure. There's still a bunch more pain, there's still a load more shit going on underneath the surface, and you feel almost like you're on a little bit of a hamster wheel, you know. You can definitely experience an inability to gain closure in relation to all kinds of different shit. So this is not just about romantic connections. However, of course, I'm hoping that the video will also be really helpful for anybody out there who is struggling to gain closure after the breakdown of a romantic connection. I'm just trying to make the point that that's not the be-all and end-all of what this video is. I'm talking basically about closure and getting over something and closing the book on something generally. So if there's something in your life that you really feel like you're just stuck on and you just can't get over it, then hopefully the guidance in this video will apply to you. I'm really excited because these notes have been building up and up now for quite some time. I kept taking this piece of paper out of my magic folder and adding to it, and finally I'm making a video about it. So let's get into it. First thing is first. You do not need to speak necessarily to the other people involved in any kind of situation in order to seek closure for that situation. A lot of the time I think we tell ourselves that we actually need to gain closure by having that ending conversation with the other people that are involved in the situation, whatever that situation might be. Sometimes that is a really destructive way of going about things. Sometimes it's not healthy or helpful for you to, you know, sit around the table, let's say, with everybody else who is involved in whatever it is you're trying to get over and hash it out. That's not always the healthiest way, and actually normally that can be a little bit of an ego trap. It can be a way to keep running back into something that secretly you know you do need to get over and you do need to move on from. The ego can be really clever at subtly telling you that you need to have that sense that there is an official artificial end. You know, the ego is very good at that kind of trickery. Now, that's not to say that there aren't tons of people out there who did receive closure from having an incredible conversation with the other people involved in whatever the fuck was going on with them. It can happen, it does happen, it's happened to me, I'm sure it's happened to loads of people watching this video. It can be the case that sometimes you just need to get it all out on the table, you need to have that conversation, and then you reach an understanding from that point on, and then you can kind of sleep better at night and you understand the situation more fully. I think if you have decided that you require dialogue with one or more people in order for closure to ultimately be sought, then you really need to think about any kind of psycho-spiritual danger that you're putting yourself in by doing that, or physical danger in some cases. That desire to talk it through with that person who has been abusing or manipulating is clearly one of the hallmarks of the abuser having control and having the upper hand, you know, and it can be very difficult to convince somebody that they shouldn't be entering into a conversation with their abuser or someone who's been manipulating them or gaslighting them for years or whatever the case may be. So you've really got to think for yourself and go into yourself, listen to your deepest inner wisdom and ask yourself, is the conversation going to bring anything to me that I don't already know? Am I going to feel like things are resolved as a result of it? Is it going to be of mutual benefit to us both? Am I hoping that I'm going to get something out of it that I'm probably really not? I think our expectations can be very high when we're going into what we would hope is a closure conversation, and when that falls short of the mark, it can be devastating and really disempowering. I think it's important to remember as well, you know, that a lot of people have to work on seeking closure and moving on when other people involved in the situation are now deceased. So for example, you know, if you had a really difficult relationship with your father and a lot of shit went down and you don't feel that you've gained closure, but your father has now passed on, then you've got to find a way of gaining that closure and moving on from that without actually getting to sit down and have a physical tete-a-tete with your father because he's no longer on planet. So I feel like that is a key way in which we would never say to somebody, you can't have closure. Oh, what a shame, your father died, you can't have closure, you can't move on from the pain in your relationship with him. No, we know that there are other ways to gain closure. We know that there are ways to process through stuff and heal through stuff, and we don't necessarily need to raise anybody up from the dead to get that closure. So it's important that by the same token, you recognise that you may not necessarily need to have that dialogue in order to gain closure. It's not good for everyone, and it doesn't always go as you want it to. And if you have very, very high expectations going into the conversation, if you almost have a creative visualization in your mind of what you want, then disappointment is highly likely, because reality is going to fall short of that mark or differ from your very carefully narrated script in some way. So that script you've been playing on repeat over and over again in your head, it's just not going to be the reality of what that conversation is like. Again, I'm not discouraging anybody from going ahead with dialogue with people in order to gain closure. I'm just saying it's important for you to understand how you're feeling, what your motivations are, be honest with yourself about what you want from it, and be honest with yourself about exactly how damaging it would be if you didn't receive your desired result. A lot of people feel shame at not being able to move on from something. A lot of people get incredibly frustrated with themselves. They start kind of timing themselves and being like, you know, it's been a month, it's been 2 months, it's been 3 months, it's been a year, I don't understand why I can't get over this. Actually, I think that the frustration is part of what creates that big stumbling block, to be honest with you. The frustration breeds this sense of instability and yuckiness and crappiness inside of you, which stops you from being able to centre on the present and focusing on moving forward. You know, the frustration and the impatience that we have with ourselves when we can't just let something go and move the fuck on, that frustration and that impatience actually makes things worse. It makes us less able to process what we're going through, and it means that we're not there for ourselves, we're not an ally to ourselves. When you can't get over something, when something's really just stuck in your throat and you're struggling to get over it, you need to be an ally to yourself in that moment. If you are berating yourself, criticising yourself, being angry with yourself because you're not over it yet, and you're really kind of just like bullying or chastising yourself for that, then there's a very high likelihood that that is actually just compounding your problems. And to be honest with you, I think that is just some plain common sense right there. I don't think anyone's going to hand me a prize for rocket science for saying that that is the truth. You know, the more that you pile on the pressure and get frustrated, the more you're working against yourself rather than with yourself, and then the more you're going to be stuck in this crappy negative cycle of not being able to move on. So it's really about being with yourself. You've got to practice patience and you've got to practice self-compassion. Now, one thing I want to talk about when it comes to being patient and really like pacing yourself with the journey of trying to seek closure is that you owe yourself compassion, you owe yourself patience, you owe yourself that space and that time and that attention to focus on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to get over. Other people around you in your midst may not necessarily have endless time and endless space and endless energy for this. It is not okay for people in your life to shame you or berate you for struggling to get over something that you just keep stumbling on and that you're still really in pain over. However, at the same time, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that it's got to be okay for people in our lives to have a limit as to the amount of time and focus they can spend engaging with us on the subject. It can be incredibly frustrating and disheartening for someone who loves you and cares for you to keep watching you break yourself over and over again on the same thing and not being able to move past it. Once that person that loves you has given you their counsel, given you their advice and been a shoulder to cry on, after a while, it's likely that they are going to want to back away because they're not going to be seeing that you are necessarily doing anything to be proactive and change your situation. And they're just going to be shit out of things to say to you, you know? So I do feel like there is that tough love element a little bit when it comes to this stuff. I know that for me, I have had, I've been blessed in my life with some friends that really were willing to just sit down and let me pick it the fuck apart with them. And I could do that with them for a good 2 or 3 hours if I felt like that was what was necessary. However, I've also at certain times been blessed with friends who are willing to tell me when there really is just nothing more that they can say to me. And I think it's important to have friends that are going to say that to you and let you know that as well. Let you know that they can't actually bring anything else to the equation, and so it's really unhelpful to keep raking over the same ground if I'm not prepared to do anything to help myself or shift my mindset. So I've been, on the one hand, really blessed to be given some friends in life and be in the midst of some friends who are willing to listen. And I'm very similar. I'm a really intent listener, and I like to hold all the space. That's really one thing that I would consider to be not only a key skill but a privilege and a joy to hold space for others. But you know, there's definitely a point where you recognise that you cannot hold space in a way that is productive anymore because this person just keeps going round on the same little merry-go-round. And I think it's okay for you to assert at that point that that is how you feel. So try not to take it personally if a friend or loved one says to you, look, you know what, I've given you my advice, I've told you what I feel is best, or I've held the space and I've listened to your concerns, but I feel like you are now in stalemate and you need to help yourself from this point on. You know, that's not always something that we should take personally. Sometimes that tough love is what we need to hear, but that is not the same as somebody berating you, criticising you, mocking you for not being over something. And if you've got someone in your midst who's doing that, then that is not cool, that's not okay. And you can definitely at that point, you know, reevaluate how much time you want to spend with somebody who would be willing to treat you like that when you're struggling with something. Empathy is the key when you're struggling to seek closure, I think. You know, it's some of the best conversations that I've ever had when I've really been struggling to just get the fuck over something have just come from somebody saying, I know exactly what you mean. I was in a similar situation myself once and it was just going on and on and on, and I couldn't work out for the life of me why I couldn't just get over it. Those conversations, even though they don't necessarily contain any instructional guidelines per se or any strategy for closure, they made me feel less alone, and they made me feel, you know, a little bit less like I was just out there on a limb just being ridiculous and being histrionic. It brought it back to me that I'm human, and that sometimes it's just really hard to get over a particular thing. And it could be for all kinds of reasons. It could have just happened at a shitty point in your life. It could have made you question your identity. It could have been just the very beginning of a bit of a shit spiral, and so you always see it as like that thing that made everything like spiral out of all control. There's so many reasons why closure might be hard to gain. So yeah, sometimes I think it's just really nice to have that person talk to you from a place of understanding and help you feel that you're not alone and that people go through this kind of thing all the time. A lot of those people as well that you talk to, they're success stories. So, you know, they acknowledge that it took them maybe years to get over something, maybe years to like shut the door on that particular part of their life. But they usually have come to a place when you're talking to them where they have managed to do that, you know, if not completely, then at least partially. I know that for me, for about 4 years after I broke up with my first serious boyfriend, I thought my future was a fucking black hole. No one could tell me any fucking different to that. You know, I was absolutely in bits. It was a really difficult experience. I didn't think I was going to get over it properly. I didn't think I was going to be able to flourish and thrive to anywhere near the extent that I believed I would have had I lived out my life with that man. And, you know, then many moons later, I was such a success story. I was one of those people that was talking to someone that was really in the throes of not being able to find closure. And I was saying, babe, I know how you feel. I know that right now your future looks like a black hole and there's nothing there. And, you know, all the rest of it. But honestly, you will rebuild. You will find the tools and you'll rebuild. I did it and you will do it. You know, that kind of thing. So I became that person that could reassure and build confidence when somebody is really feeling like shit, you know. This is it, I'm never going to be fixed, I'm never going to heal this. You know, quite often you come across people who felt like that themselves once upon a time, and they realise, no, you can heal, I did heal, I'm the proof. And sometimes that can be encouraging and reassuring. I think that when we're struggling to find closure after something's happened, we need to take accountability for our part in striving for that closure, moving towards it, recognising that we can't just remain stuck in the past, and we can't allow ourselves to open our hearts up to bitterness and all that kind of nastiness. You know, it's really about accepting responsibility. Like I said before, sometimes a person in your life will ask you to accept responsibility in what may come across as a harsh way, but I don't think it's always harsh, you know. Sometimes I do think that we can beat a dead horse. We can absolutely just talk something to death and nothing really comes of it. We've got to be prepared in the end to acknowledge our own responsibility for at least starting to take some steps to help ourselves to gain closure. That's a little bit better. The light over there by the window was awful. Okay, let me just grab my notes. So I want to talk specifically today about designing a course for closure. So actually kind of putting yourself through a series of activities and ritual observances to help you to break into closure. And I will talk about that, and that will be kind of like the bulk of the video. But there's a few other things that I want to say first. When you are considering your inability to get closure on something, I think it's important to ask yourself if you are scared of what comes next in life if you let go of this thing and create the space necessary for something new to flood into your line of sight. Because sometimes the ego likes to hold on to stuff that's old, because actually the ego is fearful of what would come next if you freed up that psychic energy, that psycho-spiritual life force, and actually allowed other things to come in and maybe grasped new opportunities or had new relationships or experienced new adventures. You know, the ego sometimes just gets a little bit addicted to what is familiar. If you're struggling with closure, ask yourself if you are fearful of the future. Ask yourself if you are concerned about where you're going to be in the near future or the long-term future. Ask yourself if you are excited about the future or if you're feeling a sense of trepidation. Sometimes if we are not really sure where we're going or what the next plan is, it can be really comfy to just hold on to this crappy thing and keep kind of replaying it and replaying it. I know it sounds really silly for me to say it's comfy, because of course it's not comfy to keep thinking about something so painful, but for the ego, you know, the ego can be a twisted little soul at times, I'm afraid, and sometimes the ego does just latch on to what is familiar, what the status quo is, because it's safe, because it's what you know. And so sometimes I think it's the anticipation of what comes next, and sometimes for a lot of people it's just the fear that we have a lot of pure potential untapped within us, and that if we let go of this bullshit, we could actually get on with the business of bringing that potential up to the surface and using it for something. I actually think that terrifies a lot more people than we're really willing to recognise. I'm very much in the camp of Marianne Williamson, where she said, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate, our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. That made so much sense to me the first time I heard it, the first time I read it. Something just clicked, and I know it's a really important spiritual message for so many people, and so many people have really resonated with it, and it definitely makes sense to me why that would be. I do think that sometimes we cling on to crappy stuff that's happened in the past that makes us play the small game, or gives us a sense of identity which is somehow broken or somehow kind of like less than. And I feel like we do that because we're afraid of what we could achieve if we just let that shit go. And even though I don't think that operates on a very conscious level, it's definitely at work, isn't it? There are definitely a lot of people holding themselves back out of fear of what they could really become and what they could really achieve. And what better way to hold yourself back than to keep tripping over this old stone from your past that you claim not to be able to find closure on. It's not to say that you're like consciously deceiving yourself or consciously being deceptive. It's just that sometimes the ego wants to cling on to something that feels safe and feels familiar, rather than go out there and look for pastures new and potentially end up getting your heart broken, or, you know, being rejected or being laughed at. You know, the ego is very much about like, no, stay here, it's comfy here, we know what's going on here, this is a good place, this is a safe place. Out there, no, bad. In here, good. In here with your pain from ages ago. Yes, excellent. Quite a long time ago now, I made a video, one of my walkie-talkie videos back in the day, about transformation and whether or not you are ready to transform, you're ready to evolve and go on into a new state of being. And one of the questions that I posed in that video that had a really profound effect on quite a few people, and in the comments it was mentioned that it was something that really resonated with people, was I asked, where is your agency right now? Never mind anything else. Where is your agency right now? Where is your power to create meaningful change right now? Where is your power to have a meaningful experience today, you know, in the present? Because you don't have any dominion in the past or the future. So anything that you can do to change your feelings or circumstances in either direction, you know, your feelings about the past or your circumstances in the future, that can only be achieved by what you do in the present. You know, there is no other time. So I think sometimes it's just about figuring out where your agency is and going there. When we are stuck under the burden of a big weight and we can't find closure, we do feel like we are in standstill, like we're in stasis. And the best thing to do when we feel disempowered is to recognize where our agency is. Where can we do some good right now? Where can we do something effectual right now? A little while ago on my own spiritual journey, it occurred to me that I had not properly received closure and experienced a feeling of true release regarding some stuff that happened to me a couple of years ago with some people who are no longer my friends. We'll put it that way. It was a difficult time, and I was faced with some cold, harsh realities about the underlying agendas of some people whom I'd been led to believe really loved me and had my best interests at heart. And I muddled through this experience because there was a lot going on at the time. I was moving down here, you know, I was moving down to the sea, and things were taking off with the business and all the rest of it. So I kind of muddled through, and I knew that I was probably papering over some of the deeper work that I had to do. I knew I couldn't do the deeper work immediately because I was just too angry and too shocked. I was bewildered and I wouldn't have been able to do that kind of deep work. But I did know after about sort of 6 months and then 8 months and then easing into a year that I wasn't doing the work that I needed to be doing. And sure enough, I did keep experiencing these triggers and these yucky associations, these nasty feelings. You know, a memory would come up or something would be mentioned on Facebook or whatever, and I would go to a very, very dark place. And every time I went to that dark place, I recognised, you know, a lot of this work has not been done. So I decided to create a course for closure where I kind of devised a series of observances and activities that I would do over a 10-day period, where all of my spiritual focus would be just basically on finding closure from this situation, and any artistic focus would be the same thing. That I would for 10 days decide that the focus was all going to be on closure from this situation, dredging up what needed to be dredged up, really sitting with it, really giving myself almost that decadent time to indulge in everything that I was thinking and feeling, so I could really get it to the surface. and just working with it, journaling with it, drawing cards, meditating. And so those 10 days were incredibly effective for me, just deciding this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to stick to it, and I'm going to hope that it's going to kind of bring me to more of a sense of empowerment over this. It really helped. I would not say that the closure is complete, but I would say that devising that conscious course for closure and committing to it for that 10-day period was incredibly helpful. Now for me, what it entailed was, first of all, a 3-day fast. Fasting is a whole big thing all on its own, with lots of literature and all the rest of it, and people that know a lot more about it than I do. I'm into the occasional water fast for the purposes of cleansing and purification and all of that deep shamanic shizzle. It really works for me. It feels very good. But I definitely don't recommend it for everybody. I definitely think that everybody, you know, mileage varies with fasting, so I'm not going to get into that. But for me, it was a 3-day water fast, and each and every day I woke up and also drew cards, and I had a specific system for drawing cards. And then I would be journaling every single evening. And then I did 3 large rituals to kind of represent that I wanted to break the bonds that were still tying me and really just kind of put myself back at the center. And I felt like those rituals did a lot of the work energetically as well. It was awesome. The whole thing was brilliant. It was a good 10 days spent just purely focusing on this thing that was still hanging over me. And so that's why I really want to posit to you the advice of creating some kind of a course for closure. So I've written down a few things that could be included in your course for closure. So first of all, choose how long your course of closure, if you will, is going to last for. 10 days I felt was a good time. I felt 2 weeks felt a little bit intimidating to think about something so painful every single fucking day and journal on it every single day. But a week seemed a little bit too short. So for me, 10 days was perfect. Some people might want to do a 30-day observance. It's really up to the individual and what you feel is required for your journey of closure. So a few things you might want to do on your kind of course of closure. Okay, so first of all, decluttering is a really good one. Decluttering your space, getting everything energetically cleansed, getting rid of any items that are to do with this thing that you're struggling to find closure over. Give those items away, sell them if that makes sense to you, or just put them in a box. Redecorating can feel good, moving things around, just taking control of your space again to the greatest extent that you can. Remember, even if you just have a bedroom in a shared house or your parents' house, you can do this. You can take control of that part of your environment. You can move things around, you can have things in a more pleasing way. That kind of stuff can really kind of just move the energy around a little bit. And don't forget also that you can ceremonially burn items if you want to, and if you feel that would help, like burning photographs, for example, or burning objects, but please do be safe and all the rest of it. Disclaimers, health and safety stickers everywhere, guys. You could try actually holding a funeral of some kind. So for me, funeral rites and the whole idea of saying goodbye in that way to something which is dead is very profound, and it's something that's really been helpful for me. Mileage may vary with other people on how effective this is going to be, but I know that for me, holding some kind of a ritualistic funeral for a friendship, for example, or just for a belief that I held that ended up being dead wrong, has been really helpful. So maybe consider the idea of conducting some sort of a ritualistic funeral to acknowledge that yes, this thing is dead, and yes, I want to honour what it once was, and I want to pay my respects for the influence it's had on me, but it has now gone, you know, it can no longer serve me. You can try writing unsent letters as part of your course of closure. I've done this before. It's really cathartic and interesting, actually. My mum always posits the 3-letter exercise, where you have to write 3 letters to the same person. Apparently the first one normally gets out quite a lot of the anger and the like sort of top layer frustration or whatever. Then the second one is that little bit more vulnerable, and then the third one is like sort of closer to what's really going on with you. But I'm sure it works in different ways with different people. But the 3-letter technique can be a really useful one. Sending unsent letters. I like to say things out loud, you know, as if I was saying them to the other person in the situation, and that can be really helpful. Design rituals, perform rituals. Rituals are incredibly transformative. They form a bridge bridge between the unconscious and the conscious. They form a bridge between what is intangible and what is made manifest in physical reality. Rituals are so fucking sacred, you know? And if you are struggling to find closure with regard to anything in your life, if something is really just stuck in your throat and stuck on your heart, and you haven't done a single ritual to try to facilitate that fresh energy coming through and that ability to release whatever it is you're holding on to, then honey, I don't know what to say to you. You've got to get on the ritual gravy train with biscuit wheels, because ritual is so cleansing, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. It can be really simple, it can be something straightforward, but ritual just really allows you to consider how you want to shape your future and how you want to feel about your experience, and then actually bring that into being through gestures and through acts and through words, and it just makes you feel so fucking empowered at a time in your life where you don't really feel empowered. Cry. I know it sounds like an obvious one, but if you've not been letting yourself cry, especially if you've been shaming yourself for not yet having found closure, now's as good a time as any. Let the floodgates open. I often say that we sometimes have to break down to break through, and I do think that tears are a gateway. They are a gateway to so much wisdom. So if you need to put crying in the schedule, if you need to actually make sure that crying is in the course curriculum for you, go right ahead and do so. I'm in full support of that. Try meditation. Meditation is such a beautiful way to clean your inner house, as I remember a meditation teacher calling it at one point. Cleaning the house within. I feel like that is one of Evan Rock's teachers, and he was quoting him, but I can't remember. Journaling can very much be a part of your course of closure. For me it was. My main rule in the evening was kind of just to check back in with the cards that I'd drawn in the morning and then journal. And just, I journaled for pages and pages and pages. There was so much shit that I needed to get out. I was reluctant at first, but once I found that groove in the wood, I think I very quickly realised that there was so much that had been unspoken and that I didn't even realise I was hanging on to, and the floodgates just opened. Try booking some classes or something like that as part of your course of closure. Think about something that you've been wanting to study for a while, or maybe you've been wanting to get back into. Maybe it's a subject, maybe it's a sport, and really kind of make the effort to lean into that enjoyable thing and actually do it and enjoy it, have a good time. You know, that should definitely be part of what closure is about. It's about repatriating our energy and our focus and then directing it somewhere which is going to be more productive for us and is going to enhance our futures. You can also do more artistic things, like you can paint, you can draw, you can have like an evolving kind of mood board where you explore every day how you're feeling, and as you do, your mood board kind of changes and you allow yourself to flow into the experience that you're having. Another really good idea for something that could be on your course of closure is to change your appearance in some way. Now this is something that a lot of people do organically, particularly women. It's a really interesting thing. It's like you kind of are acknowledging that you want to reach this different stage in your life, or that something has happened in your life that's been game changing, and suddenly the haircut comes out, or the hair dye, or the wardrobe changes, or whatever. And that can definitely be some really good shamanic medicine. Think about whether or not you might want to shake things up appearance wise and give yourself a different feeling and a different energy from how you actually present to the world and how you feel in your own skin. Consider receiving therapy, receiving some kind of a session, a reading, something like that with somebody that you trust. During a course of closure, I think it's a really good idea to welcome that objective outside advice and give yourself a chance to think about things differently. For some people, the therapeutic journey actually begins, you know, because they cannot get over a particular thing, and the therapist is actually brought into the equation to help with that. I think for other people it's not as clear cut as that, and for some people they are already in therapy but they may not necessarily have chosen to place a lot of emphasis on the issues they're having with closure. Whatever the case is for you, if you know that you need some form of professional input, unbiased, objective, neutral input from somebody that has your best interests at heart and is trained, then if you've got the cash to do that, go ahead and do that. Don't sit on the sidelines and tell yourself that you shouldn't do it. I think that people that are struggling with closure can really get a lot from just one session or one reading. I know I have in the past. I went to a Gestalt therapist once. I only needed to go twice. I got turned inside out. All the shit and the anger and the bitterness that was in me just drained away, dear friend. It was really interesting. We had planned to have we discussed that I might need up to 20 sessions and I literally had 2, you know, so it can happen. Make plans for your future. Set goals for your future, even if it's not your long term future, even if it's only like the next couple of weeks or for the rest of the year or whatever. Set goals, make plans, definitely enjoy doing that. Let that be part of your course of closure. I've also written down here home silence retreat, which for some may be a little ambitious if you have children or a partner. If you have housemates that you live with, then obviously that's not necessarily going to be possible, although it may be possible where safety allows for you to go and camp out for the night and get your silence retreat there. So why do I suggest a silence retreat then as a potential part of your course of closure, as it were? To be honest with you, I just think sometimes we can't fucking hear ourselves. And I also think that when we're clinging on to something in an egoic fashion, we are scared to sit with our thoughts and just be. We are scared of what is going to come through. And this comes back to something I was saying earlier about actually our fear being a lot more to do with our potential a lot of the time than it is to do with our imminent failure. To me, it's very difficult to be quiet. It's very difficult to be silent. And I like the fact that it's difficult. I like the fact that that is a challenge for me, that even when I'm on my own, I want to mutter under my breath or sing or, you know, I just don't want to be quiet. And so for me, there is that discipline aspect to it that I think can be a really nurturing thing. If I take it in the right way, you know, I don't berate myself for being a loudmouth. I'm a loudmouth. That's just who I am. But I think it's really interesting when you challenge yourself to go to that uncomfortable place and stay there. It's an incredible opportunity for breakthrough. Create a book list. Create a list of books that you want to read and get to work on reading them. I've written here creative projects, either solo or collaborative. Think about what kinds of projects you want to start, what kind of projects you are engaged in that you want to give more of your time and energy to. I've got here fasting / cleansing. Again, like I said, that's not for everybody. I would recommend that you look into it, make sure that you make a choice that is informed and that you know that you are safe and you're excited about the prospect of doing it and you're read up on it, rather than using it for any yucky, insidious reasons, please. People with eating disorders, my darlings with eating disorders, I'm looking at you. Very important not to put yourself in the danger zone. Do something scary. Do something that freaks you out. That's a really good thing to have in your course of closure. It's like a rite of passage, you know, and sometimes that can be what's necessary to show you where your strong inner core is. And take a road trip, you know, sometimes road trips, whether we're with others or alone, can really help us to just shift our perspective on things. And if it's been a while since you've made a plan to go out of town or go and see something new or go somewhere new, maybe your journey of closure demands that you do just that, that you get out of your environment and you see something different and you see things in a different way. Don't forget, drawing cards is a really good one. If you work with tarot, if you work with oracle, or if you work with other divinatory systems that you find are nurturing for you, that you get a lot out of, it can be so useful to do daily draws just to really lean into the finer and more complex points of your particular circumstances, your particular thing that you're going through. The cards can really speak so loudly and so clearly. They can be a great comfort when they need to be, but they can also provide that loving kick in the pants where necessary as well. So obviously don't put all of those things in your course of closure, or you're just going to be so busy that you're going to have to wear nappies because you're not going to have time to go to the toilet. But obviously just kind of those ideas are just a springboard that you can jump from, really. They're really there to let you know what is possible so you can lean into what feels right for you and design a course of closure from that point onwards. Check in with yourself regularly throughout your course of closure just to figure out how you're feeling, whether or not any new feelings are coming to the surface or anything interesting that you weren't aware of before. And if you need to tweak or change what's going on with your course of closure, if something really just isn't working for you and you're not enjoying it, then obviously feel free to go in and tweak it and change it up. But just make sure that you're not just messing with the plan because you're about to hit on something important. I tend to find that sometimes the ego has a way of tricking us. I'm being really down on the ego in this video, I know, but just bear with me, right? The ego has a special way of saying, oh, that's not working. We're going to need to sit down now and reassess whether or not we can have that activity or that belief or whatever. But actually actually that's just a distraction, you know, that's just distracting you from the bigger work and the bigger realizations. The reason that I choose to do things like observances and like give myself courses that I do, you know, the reason that I choose to do things like 30-day meditations and working with a deck for a certain amount of time every day and all that kind of thing is because there's power and potency in that. There just is, point blank period. When you keep giving yourself to something over and over and over again, it just really does open up so many doors in a lot of ways, you know. It's like an invitation for the information that you want to glean or the comfort that you want to experience coming forward. It's an invitation, and once the energy is representative of that invitation, all kinds of amazing stuff can come through. At the same time though, when you start getting somewhere, you may hit upon this feeling that you need to change everything or you can't carry on for some reason, and that's self-sabotage. And you've got to be really clear with yourself about self-sabotage, because other people can tell you that you're doing it, but only you can put a stop to it. So what I'm trying to say in a bit of a roundabout, like cack-handed way, is essentially that if the work starts to be hard for you and it starts to be a grind, or it starts to be something that you want to avoid, don't immediately assume that that means that the course needs to be tweaked or it's not right for you or you took the wrong path. Sometimes it can just represent that you're close to hitting on something and it doesn't feel very comfortable for you, it doesn't feel very nice, so you want to move away from it, you know. So do make sure that you try to persevere first of all before you start tweaking your plans. Consider telling somebody that you are putting yourself on a course of closure. This can be really helpful for accountability. Obviously make sure it's somebody that you trust and who has your best interests at heart, be they personal or professional, and just let them know what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's important. I think that that can definitely help to strengthen resolve at certain times. The trick here is dedicating yourself to it fully and working on it every day, but at the same time not beating yourself up if you miss a day or if you don't work on it. You know, that's really the crux of it. And it's so hard for so many people, because once we make a commitment to something ongoing and consistent like this and we fall off the wagon, it's really easy to fall into berating and criticising yourself. And I see how easy it can be, because I really clock myself doing it very quickly, because I'm a teacher of self-love. So I clock it so quickly. But it still happens to me, you know. You can teach self-love for however many years and talk about it however much you want, but sometimes that still will happen to you, and it's really just about being vigilant. I would recommend never including anything in your course of closure or in the rituals that you do or any of that stuff on somebody else's recommendation if it doesn't feel right for you. If there's one thing that some people have some fucking funny advice on, it's getting closure. And I don't mean funny ha-ha funny, I mean peculiar. You know, some people have convinced themselves beyond all doubt that the only way that they could get closure was to smash up their ex-boyfriend's car or whatever, you know. So sometimes advice from other people on closure isn't necessarily going to lead you down the right path. You've got to listen to what's coming from within, and sometimes people have really strong opinions on what you ought to be doing to gain your closure. So sometimes it's important to filter those voices out and just really go into yourself and figure out what it is that you most want and how you want to handle the situation. This is not somebody else's journey of closure, it's yours, and you could be operating in a very different way to them. You could be a very different person, the circumstances could be really different. So just make sure you're checking in with yourself first and signing off yourself on everything that anybody else has advised. There's nothing wrong with people making recommendations, but just make sure that you are happy to go ahead with those recommendations and try them out, and if not, back away slowly. You do not need to make somebody else's closure crusade into yours. You know, you can do things your own way. If you find that something comes along that really tests you, that makes you feel as though you've fallen back somehow, like a lot of the good work that you've done has been undone, I really want to encourage you to go back to that question: where is your agency right now? A few times with this situation that I've encountered, that I explained earlier, that I did this healing work for, these observances, a few times I have been just punched in the gut by something that just came unexpectedly and made me feel really fucking terrible. And I kind of used that as a barometer for where I was in a way, but I also used it as a challenge to myself not to let myself get embroiled in that stuff again. There's nothing wrong with feeling your feelings, okay? I feel my feelings about what happened to me, but I know the difference between feeling them, processing them, acknowledging them, and then shrouding myself in them like the Five of fucking Cups, you know? And I definitely don't want to do the second one. And believe me, neither do you, honey child. Okay, so there's a couple more things that I want to make sure that I say before I sign off today. First of all, earlier in this video, I explained that there are going to be some people in your midst who, after a while, are not going to feel as though they can productively and constructively guide you on the issue, because it's just come to an impasse, you know? There's just no way that any movements are being made on any side. You're still stuck. And it somehow doesn't feel right, in a way, after a while, to allow someone to just keep churning out the same advice, especially when they might be really worried about you. However, like I said, there is a difference between somebody having to back away and then somebody just being outright rude and dismissive and criticising. I really want to encourage you not to put up with any of that bullshit. Seriously, don't let somebody shame you for taking a while to get over something, whatever it is. Don't let someone shame you for that. And normally the people that are shaming somebody for struggling to find closure are the exact same people that are not doing their work. There is something inside of them a lot of the time that requires closure, and they don't want to look at it. So they're threatened by the idea of you looking at it closely, examining it closely, and trying to get to the bottom of it and find that closure. That's alien to the people that mock you and resent you and criticize you and bully you. They don't want to go there in themselves, and they find it really uneasy to watch you go there in yourself. And the final thing I want to say, guys, is obviously I'm a witchy woo-woo, so I like to use ritual and spellcraft to help me with things. This is just a personal piece of advice from me to you. It may not go over. You obviously have your own magical ethics. All of you here partaking in this video, my audience here, you will have your own ethics. You will have your own idea of what's right and wrong in magical practice, what works, what doesn't work, what is going to be effective and why. For me personally, this is just my personal opinion. I have, as far back as I can remember anyway, I have only ever used magic to help me get through the issues I was having with gaining closure. I never once used magic to let me skip over it and just be done with it and not feel this pain anymore. For me, that's really bad psycho-spiritual juju. I do not want to use magic to take my pain away like that and forget everything ever happened. To me, that's not conducive to being my best self and living my best life. So I choose to use magic to help me to move through the difficulties that I'm having with grace, with integrity if needed, with clarity, you know, and with inspiration. I want to be inspired by my journey. That's the kind of shit that I use magic for. I do not use magic to take the pain away. I know that the pain is normal and natural. I know that I need to feel it. It's okay. I don't want to use magic to take away something that just simply needs to be processed psychologically, as much as it may hurt. So I wanted to leave you with that. Obviously, again, your mileage may vary. Have a word with yourself if you do practice magic. Think about how you might want to use the magical arts to help you to move through your issues, gain fresh understanding, confront whatever still remains hidden. But at the same time, you know, make sure you're not trying to paper over the cracks with magic or skip to the end of your healing journey and your journey of understanding by, you know, just doing a spell. I don't think that enriches anyone, does it? I mean, it could well work, but it's not going to enrich you. And I've got a feeling that those feels are going to come back and bite you in the arse one way or another at one point down the line. So you may as well deal with your shit and confront it now, rather than using magic to get out of its grasp, I suppose you could say. But magic can be incredibly effective when it comes to helping you to get the strength and the balance that you need to move through the emotions you're having and then reach closure. I have loved making this video. I finally got to talk about all these fucking notes. Thank you so much to my clients who have inspired this conversation. Some of you will know who you are. And thank you so much for just your continued support, all of you. I'm really, really flattered that people get so much from my videos. It feels great. It felt great back in 2012 when I first started doing it, and it feels sensational now. It's really lovely to know that some of my videos have been game-changing for people, and whether you're here mostly for the witchy stuff and the tarot stuff or the self-love stuff or whatever, thank you for being here. The channel has given me such an incredible creative lease of life, and I've really enjoyed it, and I don't think I'd enjoy it anywhere near as much if it wasn't for the interaction and the engagement and the opinions and all of that. So yeah, just taking an opportunity to say thank you as well. Much love, blessed be. Mwah. The light in my flat today is so weird. I feel like this whole half of my face is just, I look like the Phantom of the Opera. This is ridiculous. Light and shadow. One of my favourite archetypes.